Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy that you decided to join us today. This will be a session or workshop on membership review and site evaluations. And we hope through the session that you'll learn all the information that you need to know to have a successful site visit, or to maybe decide you want to volunteer to be on some of these site teams because they are all staffed with volunteers. So we are very excited that you're with us today to learn more. I've got some great experts with me today that you'll be hearing from that will answer all your questions. We've saved a lot of time at the end to make sure that we can answer specific questions that you might have. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction about the overall process of the site evaluations, and then we'll get into more details in a minute with our speakers. So the first thing to kind of understand, if we could just go to the next slide, is that the membership review process is different than the accreditation process. So that's one thing you will want to keep in mind, that the ABA is your accreditor, and then the AALS is a membership society, and we do membership review. So different than the ABA process, even though they're both do it together. Our review with AALS is definitely more of a peer review. And then the ABA, of course, has the standards that they're looking if you're complying with your standards in the ABA world. So think of it more as a list of requirements that the ABA is checking off to see if you're doing all the requirements. And we're looking more at what we call our core values. So the values of our society that we're looking to see if how the schools are adhering to those core values. So we can move to the next slide to talk a little bit more about the core values. So as you all, I'm sure all know, you can find the core values in Article 6 of our bylaws, and they compose of scholarship and teaching, diversity and non-discrimination, self-governance, academic freedom, and honesty and integrity. So when we are reviewing the schools, we're looking at those core values and seeing how the schools are meeting those values. And now we'll go to the next slide. So I want you all to know that we presume that everybody's following the core values, and that is just 99% of the case is that people are following the core values, and it's really a fun committee to serve on because you can see how people incorporate the values in many different ways. So I've really enjoyed getting to see that. It's not just a cookie cutter approach. So we definitely presume that everybody is following the values. If we do see any issues, there's a couple things that might happen. We might just do some peer counseling if we see a school maybe struggling with one of the values. And that would just be maybe a call from us to just talk and brainstorm about maybe ways that we could help a school. If there's a little bit more of a shortcoming, then we have a little more concern, we might just ask for a report back. So give you so much time, and then we would like to just hear the steps you're taking to improve the situation we've noticed. But by far, the letters that go out really praise your innovation. There is so many exciting things happening in legal education right now. And we are lucky enough to be on this committee where we get to read about them and actually congratulate you in your school. So a lot of the talking that we do is all about the great things you're doing, and we like to praise you for that. Again, you pursue the core values in multiple different ways, so we're not looking for one thing for any of those values. We understand you're each unique and have different missions, and so we take that into account. And the final thing before I turn it over is this is all very confidential. So we do not discuss with anyone what we read or what we see from the reports. It is very confidential within the committee. And so you'll never hear us publicly talk or privately talk about any of the things we're learning about your schools. So now I get to turn it over to our fabulous executive director of the AALS, Judy Arene. She and the committee and the other staff members make our work so easy. So she's going to give you a little more details about the AALS process. Judy, take it away.
Thank you so much, Susan. And we can move to the first slide. I just want to underscore the importance of the volunteers. This is not a staff-run process. It is all volunteers who are members of AALS. And Susan is an outstanding example. She has taken on the additional burdens of chairing the Membership Review Committee, which I'll describe in a moment. But both that committee and the Executive Committee, which will be voted on by all the member schools this coming Saturday morning, everyone is volunteering their time and their expertise, and it makes the process go as well as it does. We follow the ABA timing, and they moved a few years ago from a 7-year review period to a 10-year review period. And our philosophy, Susan touched on this, is not to duplicate what the ABA does. Our member law schools do not need 2 accreditors. Instead, our philosophy is that we want to complement that process by focusing, as Susan has explained, on core values. We look not only through the tenure review, but if there's a significant change of operation, say you open a new branch in another city, that would also trigger a look from the Membership Review Committee. Okay, we can move on. So the process itself, 4 parts to it, begins with the site visit that was mentioned earlier. For this past year, the site visits have been virtual. And I know one of the things ABA is going to be discussing is how much of future site visits, even after the pandemic, will remain virtual, maybe hybrid, Bill Adams just said. After the visit, there's a report. There's actually 2 reports. There's an ABA report, but there's a separate AALS report focused on our core values. That's sent to the member school after the visit, and any response they have is appreciated and moves to the next stage, which is that the Membership Review Committee itself looks through the AALS report and any response. It also looks at all the ABA materials, including the ABA review of the school and responses from the school. And at that point, our Membership Review Committee makes a recommendation to the Executive Committee of the Association, which in the end decides what will be done. Normally, it's a letter to the school, and the letter may say, keep on, you're doing a fabulous job, and we do try and talk about positive accomplishments. Or it may say, well, yes, you're doing a good job in most things, but here's something you need to work on. In a few instances, it might include a request, we need a report back sooner than 10 years. Let's move on. So once the Membership Review Committee has the report of the ABA, of the AALS member of the joint site visit team, so most of the members are appointed by the ABA, but there's one person there appointed by AALS. The committee itself, which Susan chairs, is a mix of faculty and deans. And they view themselves almost as an appellate body because the reporter on the site visit is the actual fact finder. They only meet twice a year, and that sometimes can cause a little bit of delay in hearing back from AALS. Once the review committee has gone through everything and had their discussion, they make a recommendation. And let's move to the next slide. And that recommendation goes to the Executive Committee of AALS, which is made up of 6 members and 3 officers. And once a year in the House of Representatives, which will meet this coming Saturday, every member law school gets to vote on nominations for new members of the Executive Committee. It's at that point that Vince Rougeau, who has been serving as president-elect, becomes president for 2020. And Darby Dickerson moves up to being immediate past president. And Erwin Chemerinsky is nominated, and we hope will, through the process on Saturday, become the next president-elect. So it's actually the EC that makes the final determination, but generally speaking, they follow the recommendations of the Membership Review Committee. If there's any particular challenges raised of understanding the AALS core values or other requirements, those are made by the executive committee, which meets in May and November. And finally, let's do one more slide. That gets us to the executive committee letter that completes the process. It may include peer advice if there's some areas that need improvement. In a few instances, there might be a request for additional information before there's a final letter. And sometimes there's a request for a progress report when there's something of concern and 10 years seems like too long. There's the potential of a sanction if there's a material failure to comply with membership requirements, but that would actually have to, in the end, be voted on by the full House of Representatives of all member law schools. So let's imagine that that's not going to happen, at least anytime soon, and move to the next slide. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you Kara McQuitty. She is our membership review manager, and she's going to talk a little bit more about what's needed for the visit from the AALS reporter. Kara?
Thank you, Judy. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kara McQuitty, the membership review manager. I'm going to go over the workshop handout, and it looks like Barbara Studeman put the handout into the chat, so if you want a copy, you can go there. I'm also going to go over support we provide for the AALS reporter. And I work closely with Barbara Studeman, who provided the handout in the chat, and she's the director of membership review. And we want you all to know that we're a resource for you, and you can reach out to us with any questions that you have. If you're a school and you have any questions on the questionnaire, you can reach out. If you're a reporter, you have any questions before or even after the site visit, just let us know. Our contact information is provided on page 4 of the handout. And so I'm going to go over the contents of the actual handout. You'll see the cover of the handout is the AALS core values that Susan went over previously. And it just gives you more information of really what we are looking for. A big difference between the AALS as a Learn It society and the ABA as an accreditor is that we focus on faculty scholarship. So if you are an AALS reporter, you may want to be assigned to the section of the ABA report that focuses on faculty. And then if you keep going through the handout, you'll see the AALS process and the role of the AALS reporter. So this just gives details on the membership review process as a whole. Schools are visited every 10 years. As Judy said, we follow the ABA and the role of the AALS reporter. The next is the site visit timeline. So we first appoint a reporter, and then before a site visit, the school will complete a questionnaire, and the questionnaire will come to both the AALS and the reporter. After the site visit happens, then the reporter will write an AALS report, and the committee will review both of the AALS report and the ABA report, and then a letter will be sent to the school regarding its membership. So we send to the reporters an appointment letter, and deans will also receive a letter with information. But the reporter appointment letter, and this year it was email since we are virtual, it really just provides background information for the school. So we give you access to a Dropbox folder that's more general information. But this letter provides you with the AALS report and the letter from the previous site visit. So you have a little bit of information about the school before you go. And within that letter, we provide instructions to the AALS reporter. And so this is really what we're looking for from you as a reporter. It goes into detail about the conversation you'll have with the dean of the law school, the AALS questionnaire, what you should look for in the AALS questionnaire, the AALS report, and finally the committee review. And then the ABA provides a classroom visit form each year. This year they've provided a virtual visit form since site visits are virtual. So that's also provided in the handout for your information. And then we have a document about the discussion with the dean. And we recommend that reporters meet separately with the dean to explain the AALS core values answer any questions that the dean may have about the ALS process. So that is a great handout that you can review before you have a discussion with the dean. The next is the actual ALS questionnaire, and I will review this in more detail shortly, but the ALS questionnaire really complements the ABA self-study. Again, we work very closely with the ABA, so we received the ABA self-study as well as the ALS questionnaire. So those really complements the ABA self-study. The next is the format of the report, and this is really an outline of just what we need from the report. The ALS reporter uses this to write the report, and we've heard from previous reporters that drafting a report before the site visit and then going on the site visit and filling in the information has been really useful. So we recommend that if you think that would be great for you. And then the letter to the school, we provide an example in the handout. And this is the letter that goes to the school after both the membership review committee and the executive committee have reviewed the school. And this sample letter, you'll see it includes a compliment or compliments on the school's achievements since the last site visit. So when you're completing the ALS questionnaire, it's great to include your achievements and improvements so that we can compliment the school on that. And finally, in the handout, you'll see the ALS membership requirements, and these are listed by topic. So if you want to know more information about what we're looking for in non-discrimination, you can find everything there, and any other topic that you're looking for. So in addition to the school-specific items that we send to the reporter in the appointment letter, you'll also receive a Dropbox invitation, and this is sent via email. And in this folder, there's general information about the site visit. This includes the membership requirements. There's a memo to the dean that you can actually provide to the dean of the school that you're visiting for more information for them. The actual ALS questionnaire, the report format outline, the reporter instruction memo, and then a few ABA documents, and finally a note on confidentiality, as Susan mentioned. And we're always looking for ways to improve the membership review process. We make changes to the questionnaire each year, and we update it to really correspond with the ABA self-study. As I said before, we work very closely, so we want to make sure that all of our information is updated. This year, we've really improved our communications with the reporters. Reporters will receive a know before you go email. So this will go out around 20 days before the site visit, and it'll just have information, and you can always respond to that email if you have any questions before you go on the actual site visit. And then when you get back from the site visit, you'll get an email that's a now that you're back email, and we'll attach the format outline to that so you have it available. And again, if you have any questions, you can ask us. In June, we send a reporter survey. So this will go to reporters from the previous academic year. And this is where you can really provide your feedback, any suggestions that you have, any positive experiences. And we just really look forward to hearing from you in that survey. And then finally, this is something that's new this year, is a thank you letter to the reporter's dean. So we send a letter after the reporter goes on the site visit to the dean of their school. If you are a dean and you're a reporter, we'll send it to your president or chancellor. And this is really just thanking you for your service. And then we also send an annual report to member schools that were visited in the past academic year and the upcoming academic year. And we'll also send that to those schools' ALS reporters, and it's publicly thanking the reporters for their service to the ALS. And so now I'll go over the ALS questionnaire, and there is a copy of the 2020 and 2021 ALS questionnaire in the handout on page 14. Every school that is visited will send an ALS questionnaire to ALS at least 20 days prior to their joint site visit. And ALS staff will review the questionnaire, and we may reach out to you directly if we need any additional information. the questionnaire is divided into 5 sections. The first is faculty and scholarship. So overall on this question, we are looking for the number of full-time tenured or tenure track faculty, as well as the number of other full-time faculty who are expected to produce scholarship. The number of faculty who have writing obligations that have not produced any scholarship within the last 3 years, and then a list of faculty members during the previous site visit and their status now, as well as a list of new faculty, and then other information too. Under the teaching section, we asked the school to attach narrative responses to several of the ABA questionnaire questions. And this is just so you don't have to repeat your answers. It's easy to just attach the narrative, and that gives us the information that we need. It's important to know that if a school has more than 20% of their JD students in the part-time division, we'll send a supplement chart to be completed with the percentage of student contact hours. So if you do select yes to having more than 20%, be on the lookout for a supplement from us. The next section is improvements since the last site visit. As I mentioned before, we're really looking for a way to compliment your school on your achievements and your improvements since the last site visit. So it's important to provide us with all of your improvements, achievements, and we'll look for that in that section. So the next is the non-discrimination and diversity section. We ask schools to attach all non-discrimination policies that appear printed or online. And it's important to know that if there are any inconsistencies in the policies, and this can include one website was updated, but another was not, and we catch this, we'll just send an email letting you know of the inconsistencies so that you can update that before the site visit happens. And it's important to know that in January of 2016, the ALS bylaw 6-3B was updated to include gender identity and gender expression. And then finally, the school is asked to complete a faculty profile chart. This is on the last page of the questionnaire. And it is important to make sure that you follow the chart and just complete that chart and not try and reorganize it. It's really easy for us to get our information if it's completed in that way. And with that, I'll turn things over to Barbara Cox, who is the ALS consultant, to discuss the role of the ALS reporter.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kara. I'm a retired professor from California Western, and I haven't been teaching any Zoom classes, so I may be a little rusty at this. So I'll try not to make you all go shrieking off your computers. If you do the next slide for me, Kara. So this may be what you have been asking yourself as you start to get all the information from the ALS, wondering what did you agree to do? And we just want to thank you for serving as reporters. It's a big job because the ALS reporter has to write 2 reports. One is part of the ABA report, and as was said, usually it's the faculty section unless you're being asked to do some other section. And then you have to write the entire AALS report. And so my job is to try to help you write a shorter and thorough report. The next slide shows you what the ALS reporter is doing, and you're really representing the ALS. All the other members of the Joint Site Team have been appointed by the ABA, and so while you do have an ABA role, your focus is slightly different, as you can see from the bullet points there. For example, with faculty governance, we're interested in whether the faculty has an important role in developing academic programs and policies. We're also interested in who votes at faculty meetings and committee meetings. Is it all the full-time faculty? Do some faculty have some restrictions on what voting they may participate in? Who appoints people to committees? Usually it's the dean or the associate dean. but many schools have elected committees. That's the kind of information we're looking for under faculty governance. We're not looking for a list of the 13 standing committees and 12 ad hoc committees. And so you don't need to include that kind of information. With faculty scholarship, we're interested in what your and the team's assessment is of the faculty scholarship that's being produced at that law school. But we're also interested in the efforts that are being made at the law school to create a vibrant scholarly community. And how do they support their junior faculty and mentor them? So those are important pieces of the scholarship section of the report. With diversity, the AALS is it's a core value, and there believes that the diverse community will encourage learning by all members of that community. This is also an efforts focus, although we do ask you to include numbers. So for example, with the student diversity, we're interested in the number and percentages of students of color and women students over the previous 3 years, but we're also interested in what has the school been doing to increase or maintain the diversity in the student body. With the faculty, it's the same kind of question. What are the numbers and percentages for faculty of color and women faculty? But what are the efforts that the school is taking? How do they compose their appointments committee? How do they create the interviews that they do at the conference? How do they bring people back? All of those questions are what you would be focusing on there. And with non-discrimination, as Kara just said, the AALS non-discrimination policy is quite broad. It's been updated recently to include gender identity and gender expression. It's sometimes you find that the school has corrected or has updated its one policy and not the others. So those are the kind of things that you'll be looking for and trying to find out. Remember, you're the fact finder. You're the person who's going to be presenting a report with facts that the membership review committee and the executive committee can use. So in the next slide, you can see there are really kind of three pieces of doing this: preparing for the visit, going to the visit, and writing the report. Of course, things have changed now with the virtual visits. You aren't going to the actual school. This has some benefits. This has some drawbacks. It makes some things easier. For example, when you're trying to visit the various classes, you can do that by Zoom and not get lost in the basement somewhere, trying to figure out where the classroom is that you're trying to find. I talked to one reporter who did a virtual visit this fall, and this might be something that both schools and teams can be thinking about. He wondered whether it might not be nice to have a drop-in office hours kind of session, one for faculty, one for students, and one for staff, where, you know, we oftentimes, when you do one of these visits, you end up chatting with somebody in the hallway or in the elevator, and you get some useful information. And he wondered whether that might not be a useful addition to the process. And the next slide talks about when you're preparing for the visit, you're going to coordinate with the key people. Obviously, again, this is going to be a conference call or phone call, Zoom sessions, but the team chair presumably will understand that you are doing both the ABA, part of the ABA and the AALS. So you'll want to make sure that you do that. With the team members, it's very important to split up the classroom visits and the office visits. So with the classroom visits, you want to be able to try to get to all of the classes that are during the scheduled time. Of course, not duplicates perhaps, but if you can try to jump into each class, you used to do that by going in, walking in, spending 15 or 20 minutes, getting up and getting out, which always makes the students wonder, oh, is the person leaving because it was so bad or so good? And so it really will be easier to just zoom in and zoom out. But dividing those class visits up, there is a class visit worksheet, questionnaire in the materials that has been posted in the chat. And those are really useful to make sure that the team members have. You're also going to be splitting up the office visits. It's important to try to talk to every faculty member who's available, full-time faculty. And so splitting those up, and that's usually pretty easy because the person writing the clinical section needs to talk to all the clinicians. The person who is writing the faculty section may want to talk to some of the faculty chairs of committees, but you'll want to do some of that splitting up. The dean, obviously you'll be talking to the dean ahead of time. The on-site point person, usually on an in-person visit, that's the associate dean or vice dean for academic affairs, may still be the same for a virtual visit. You also want to make sure that you can talk to and make arrangements to speak to the faculty chairs of committees, particularly if there's perhaps the self-study committee, the appointments committee, some of those, the curriculum committee, if there's been a big change. And then key staff members, the admissions director, the head of career services. If there are facilities questions, you would want to talk to the facilities manager. Additionally, in addition to coordinating with the people, in the next slide shows that you want to look at the key documents. It really is very helpful if you are pretty well acquainted with these materials so that when you ask questions, it's clear to the school that you have read their material. They obviously are much happier when you ask them about, well, I saw you had these 3 major improvements in the materials and tell me how they're going, rather than just starting with, did you have any improvements this year? And they roll their eyes and say, but we already gave you that in Appendix M. So reviewing those documents is valuable. Same thing with ABA documents. And the school's website is often useful. We all know that school websites tend to get out of date a little bit. So it's frequently useful to look at some of those and then see if you have questions about any of that information. So when you're preparing, it's also useful to really look at the format of the ALS report that's in the attachment materials and then to actually follow the suggested ALS format for the report. One of the things that we'll do is make it clear to you what the ALS is looking for from your report, and it will also limit you, and so that you don't have to include everything. The ABA has a much broader questionnaire, and obviously the ALS is looking closely at that information that is provided by the ABA, but that doesn't need to be in your report. That's contained in the ABA report. As Kara said, some people like to write a draft before the visit. I actually have never found the time to do that because by the time you've set up all of your meetings and you've read all the materials, I think it's very difficult to also try to write a draft before. I usually just went through the format outline and then figured out the questions that I had that I couldn't determine from the materials. And when you used to do it on actual visit, sometimes you could get a good outline or start of a draft on the plane home if you weren't too exhausted, which frequently you are. Finally, when you're preparing for the visit, you're going to be talking to the dean early on in the process. It's usually useful to just call and introduce yourself if you don't already know the dean. It's also useful sometimes to have an in-person meeting set up early in the visit or another time during the visit in case you find some issue that comes up. For example, one of the schools that was visited this fall had an academic freedom policy, which is important to the ALS, that only included the full-time faculty and not the part-time adjunct faculty. It wasn't because they intended to exclude those people. It just wasn't particularly hadn't been thought of with the policy. A quick meeting with the dean was able to then bring that change to the faculty and was all resolved very quickly. So leaving some time so that you can check back in with the dean and or the vice associate dean is really valuable. You want to make sure that the dean understands the ALS role as different from the ABA role has been talked about. It's a membership organization. It's to support the members and focus on the core values that are central to the ALS mission. And one thing that really is being focused on, the executive committee and the membership review committee are very interested in what the school is doing right, what they're doing with, what innovations they've developed, and making them understand that that's an important piece of what the knowledge that then comes into legal education by the membership review and executive committee learning about these important innovations. For the next slide, with the visit, usually you have the first meeting with the team. Of course, this will all be virtual. At the school, there's always a entrance interview and an exit interview that usually includes the president of the university if there is one. Frequently, the president will want to include the provost and the dean. You have that meeting at the beginning and on the way out to tell them what you found out. Meet with key people. As I said, you want to divide up the faculty, talk to the vice dean, associate dean, make sure that someone is talking to the chairs of important committees, talking to important staff members. Splitting up the class and office visits should be easier with a virtual visit, and then doing due diligence. Obviously, you start with the idea that you trust what the school is telling you, and then you verify it if you have any questions. Fill in the blanks. It's oftentimes you can't know what those blanks are until you have actually completed look carefully at the ALS materials. So then writing the report, which is the next slide. If you, I should tell you, I'm an ex-legal writing professor. And so, looking at the report and trying to make sure that it is professional in all ways, that it's consistent, that you call the law school all the way through and not change it back and forth. Those types of things you just want to be careful with. We ask you to limit your report to 7 to 10 pages, single-spaced. The format memo, which tells you what to put in the report, is 4 pages, single-spaced. So that obviously tells you that we're looking for clear, concise statements of how the school is meeting the issues that are being raised in the format memo. When you're doing your report, it's very useful to get the ABA team members' drafts once they're received, because some of your report, for example, you will want to get the report from the library member of the team so that you can write up the library section, the students section, team member, all of those. You'll want to get those drafts once they come in rather than waiting for the final report to get put together. Feel free to incorporate the ABA report by reference, but try to include the information asked for in the format memo in the ALS report. And you want to make sure that the final draft and the ABA report and your draft are consistent. That's one of my jobs, is to check in and try to make sure that's true. You want to be factual. Try to avoid using adjectives that say this is the best law school I've ever seen or the worst. You don't want to, avoiding adjectives is always a safe way to do that. Avoid judgments and conclusions. There's a tendency, for example, to say the law school's non-discrimination policy meets the requirements of bylaw 6-3. What you really want to do is provide the actual language of the policy, and then the membership review committee and executive committee can make that conclusion as to whether it meets that standard or that bylaw or not. Try to avoid any names in the report, such as this faculty member or that staff member, and then try to remember to polish and edit it, but I will help with that when I get your report. As the next slide shows, you'll then submit your report to the AALS office. You'll expect to hear from me with questions, changes. There may be some delay. We don't respond and get back to you, the reporter, until we've received, the AALS has received the ABA report. And so it may be that you will get your report in quickly and then you have to wait for to hear from me, but I will send you an email and attach a red line edited version of the report. I'll have some comments and ask you, should we include this? Do you think that this would be a better way to do this? Feel free to say, no, I don't, I like it the way it is. That's fine. You're the author, and so you get that choice. But if I ask for information, I'll try to include it, rather than have you have to dig around and find it. But sometimes I'm not able to find that. And then we get the report finalized. And then you get to the last slide, which is that you're done. Nothing feels quite so good as emailing the final report in and knowing that you've completed your work. And once again, we really appreciate all the effort that each of you puts into making this process such a valuable part of the AALS membership process. So I'll turn it now over to Bill Adams, who is the managing director of the Legal Education ABA section. And thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Barb. So thanks to those of you who are participating and thinking of volunteering. And for school representatives, I encourage some of you, or all of you actually, to think about volunteering to do site visits. It's a very important process, and having knowledgeable people on the teams makes it work more efficiently. And I encourage those of you who are representing schools to think about that going forward. Before I get started, I do want to clarify that we are doing virtual site visits this year. I think it's folly to try to predict how the vaccine rollout and the pandemic will progress 9 to 15 months from today. So we're not fully decided. We haven't fully decided yet how we'll conduct the fall visits. I suspect they will also be virtual, and maybe the whole year will be virtual. I see no need to have anyone risk their health. I don't want any of our volunteers getting sick by doing a site visit for us. And heaven forbid, I don't want a volunteer to unintentionally infect people at a school. So I take a really conservative attitude about this. And generally speaking, I mean, we can all debate what being safe means, but I tend to err on really being cautious, and I don't want anyone to become ill because they've engaged in a site visit. Also, we have found the fall visits seem to be going well. We have several visits in the spring. I want to continue to get feedback from teams and schools being visited in the spring before we make final determinations. We may very well, as Judy alluded to, after the pandemic, decide to do our visits virtually going forward, or some sort of hybrid process where there will be 2 or 3 people who may be on site and the rest of the team will be doing this virtually. The virtual process, like I say, has been positively received thus far because it saves the schools a lot of money, and the process seems to be going fairly efficiently. So my slides, I'm going to talk about how the process normally goes, and then I'll end with how virtual visits go, and I'll talk some more about how we may incorporate the virtual process moving forward. So as has already been alluded to, we moved to a sabbatical review process of every 10 years some time ago. Schools, of course, must prepare their self-study, which involves the site evaluation questionnaire and the self-assessment. We can move to the next slide. Thank you. So the first process, right now, I am recruiting site team chairs for 21-22 visits. I think we have 14 of the chairs already selected. We have 6 or 7 remaining. We have a new dashboard that's still, we're still working with the programmers to make it fully efficient. But at this point, the site teams are going into our dashboard. It's going to be an automated process. I mean, the ultimate goal is that all the documents will go into can be uploaded into our dashboard and downloaded from that. Teams and schools can go in and look at their documents, upload documents. We hope to eventually, make it so that schools don't have to do hard copy documents anymore. That's still a work in progress. Once the site team chair is appointed, the chair talks to the school about setting the dates. Once we have the dates, then we can recruit the other site team members. Most teams will have a librarian, a clinician, a judge practitioner, an academic, a university administrator, and the AALS representative. Now, these aren't strict requirements. I mean, we are still generally always, not generally, we're always including a librarian and clinician and an academic. The judge practitioner and university administrator slots, sometimes we have more academics. It just depends upon the school and the team and how the recruitment process is going. The chair will coordinate with the team members as to the assignments. Those school representatives, the last time you were visited, you may have gotten a narrative site report. Our site reports now are in a question and answer format. We have found that that's a much better way to get the information that's required, and that there's much less missing information from the question and answer format and fewer report backs for schools. The chair will coordinate, as I say, with the team members, saying you're assigned, questions 1 to 10, 11. The librarian will have the librarian questions, et cetera, et cetera. And we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the materials, like I say, will be uploaded by the school. The SEQ and the self-assessment will be uploaded by the school. The site report template, which is what I have alluded to, which is the question and answer format, which is how the site report is put together these days. As Barbara said, you'll do the preparation for the visit, looking through the SEQ and self-assessment, and start thinking about how you can answer those questions and what follow-up needs to be done. I will say here that one of the changes we've done with the virtual visits, which I do think will make permanent, is the staff is now looking at the school's SEQ and giving the team then direction, saying the question 1, the school's provided all the information we think the council needs. All you need to do is verify it. Or we'll say, the school's provided this information, you need to do this follow-up. This has been very positively, part of the reason I think we'll make this permanent, the initial feedback has been very positive on this, because both schools and teams have a much better idea exactly what the office thinks that the council needs. So, and it also saves the team some time, because they don't ask things that aren't necessary. And verifying information is generally much easier than having to figure out what it is you need to provide our answer to the question. I think we'll continue to do that moving forward. Hopefully, this will also help schools avoid some of the report backs. I'll give my general disclaimer about this as always, and the template says this, and that is, even if the staff says we think the school has provided all the information that the council needs, it's ultimately the council's determination. So they may ultimately say, well, with due regard to what Bill or Stephanie think, we would also like some additional information. So we can't guarantee you that there won't be follow-up from the council, but we hope that we'll avoid a lot of that through our assessment of saying, okay, we think you also need to provide this additional information. Then the site visit occurs. Normally, in normal times, there will be the team meetings, entrance meetings, interviews with faculty, administrators, staff, class visits, meetings with students, and then the exit interview with the school. Next slide, please. Post-visit, similar to what Barb said, you will be preparing your site report. You'll fill out the site report template, answering those questions. Then the chair will collect it and send it to the office. We'll once again do our review, once again trying to make sure that we think that all the questions have been answered satisfactorily so the council can make a determination as to where the school is in compliance with each and every standard. We will get back to the chair with our comments and edits, similar to what Barb said. We really discourage you from using adjectives. So we don't want you to have in there, we believe the academic support program is excellent. Maybe it is, but that's ultimately a conclusion for the council to make. And so we don't want you to say that. It is awkward when we don't catch that and the school gets in a report that something is excellent and the council says, we don't think so. And it causes confusion and embarrassment, and we want to avoid that. Similar to what Barb said, we would like for you to avoid using names in the report, positive or negative. It's just better to do that. There will be other sort of editorial comments we'll sometimes make. We also discourage you from comparing the school to yours. We strongly discourage that. The fact that, this school has something similar to ours and it's excellent, please don't say that. Or I, in recent time, had to remove from a site report a constant reference in the library section to this school doesn't have electronic whiteboards. We do. We think most schools have electronic whiteboards. Well, that may be a wonderful thing for schools to have, but it's not a requirement in the standards. And so one, I didn't want it in there. Two, saying, our school has a lot of electronic whiteboards, and so this school should too. So another thing, please don't do that. Similar to what Barb said, we work with the chair to try to accommodate you. So if we make an editorial suggestion and you don't like it, sometimes we'll leave it in. I mean, there are some things we just have to take out. I mean, there are some things that for legal purposes we will take out. And otherwise, like you say, sometimes if it really does seem to be something inappropriate, even if you say, no, I want to continue to say they have an excellent academic support program, I will overrule you and say, well, you just can't say that. Sorry. Otherwise, like I say, we accommodate generally your preferences in how the report is put together. The site report will be sent to the school, and the school then has an opportunity to send its response, disagreeing with things that the site team found, adding things, updating things, and send that in to be reviewed by the council. Next slide. So the council will then consider the report, but we will send evaluation forms, survey forms to the dean, to the chair, to the team members, to the person in the office who reviewed the report, and to the council monitor, asking about site team members. And this is really important to us. And I know some schools feel very nervous about responding to these surveys, wondering if, somehow this will be negatively perceived. Please don't decline to give us an honest feedback about what happened on your visit and the team. Obviously, we don't share with team members that someone says this team member behaved inappropriately and did whatever, but it's vital for us to know that, because we don't want to use volunteers who don't follow our rules or engage in gossip at the school or otherwise do things that we need to know so that we don't continue to use someone who's not doing the job appropriately. So please be very frank and very honest with us if during your visit anyone did something that you think we need to know and is inappropriate. The site report will be, and as I indicated before I move on, because some of you are volunteers, we'll ask the team members to also evaluate each other and the chair. So we need to know also if our chairs are doing their job. So did they make the assignments clear? Did they follow up with your questions, et cetera? Because that chair position is also very important. It's also important we ask team members if there are people on the team that you think would be good chairs moving forward, because we're always looking to expand our pool of chairs and team members. So finally, as I indicated, the site report and the school response will then be reviewed by the council, which will issue a decision letter. So in that decision letter, the council will either find you in compliance with each standard or may give you what is called an 11A2, which says we believe that we don't have enough information from the school to make a compliance decision on this particular standard. Like I said, with the staff assessments going on now, we're trying to minimize those so that you get fewer of the, we just don't have enough information yet. We want to get additional information from the school. And the decision letters try to be really specific about this is exactly what we're concerned about or we're not sure about. The 11A3s are, we have the information we need, and based upon what we see, we have reason to believe that you may be out of compliance. That's not a finding that you're out of compliance at that moment. It just means that they do think you are, and you'll be given a chance to respond to that. I tell schools, particularly with new deans, sometimes they'll call me and they'll say, well, I got 2 11A2s and 2 11A3s. Is that terrible? Should I think the school's doing terribly? I just want to say I've been at the school, the office for 6.5 years, which means I think I've probably seen at least 150 or more schools inspected. I think the number of schools that don't have 11A2s or 11A3s, I can count on both hands, probably on one hand, maybe 4 or 5 schools that after a site visit, the council had absolutely no questions about. It is not abnormal at all, and sometimes schools will get a lot of these and they'll be very worried. And as I tell the school, what you need to worry about mostly is what those 11A2s and 11A3s are about. Some of these will be very easy fixes. So your links didn't work when the site team was there, or your application is missing a clause and it needs to do, or your application is not consistent with your website. Those are easy fixes. Obviously, you want to avoid those, but they're not as serious as some of the non-compliance issues with other standards. So ready for the next slide. As I indicated, the school has a chance then from the decision letter to report back to us on the 11A2s and 11A3s. Hopefully, you'll get finding by the council that you're in compliance. If the council is unpersuaded in your response to an 11A2 or an 11A3 that you're in compliance with standard, then you will get an 11A4 decision letter, which says, we believe you're out of compliance with standard X. You are therefore you and your university president are therefore, if for independent law schools, the president of the board are put on notice for a hearing that will be scheduled. And the way that goes is as follows. So we're having the February council meeting next month. And so if a school is found out of compliance on an issue, we will send the school a letter saying that we believe you're out of compliance, or the council believes you're out of compliance with X standard. The hearing will be set 2 meetings hence, 6 months later. So in February, the meeting would be set for August. The hearing would be set for August. However, we would say you can file a response at the next meeting, the May meeting. And if the council is persuaded now that you actually are in compliance, you may have brought yourself back into compliance within that 3-month period, then the hearing will be canceled. So that gives you another opportunity to avoid the hearing. So generally speaking, the process goes that you'll get the 11A4 and the hearing will be set for 6 months, but you're given one more opportunity to say, I think you're wrong. I think you misread our response. Or 2, we did fix whatever you continue to think we haven't done. And so, for example, like say with February 11A4s, in May, we'd look at your response, the council would look at your response and say, actually, you're in compliance. We're canceling the August hearing. If, in fact, the May response doesn't satisfy the council and the August hearing where you and the representatives you want to come with you appear, then if at that point, you have one more opportunity to persuade the council to find you in compliance with the standard. If the council still thinks the school is out of compliance, then it can decide whether it wants to issue sanctions or not. Those can include private censure, a public censure, a probationary finding at some points. And unfortunately, recently, as you're probably aware, some schools have had their ABA approval removed. So all of those things can happen. Let me say about all of this, when you get your decision letter from the council, and as I alluded to, you should always feel free to reach out to Stephanie Jiggets, the Deputy Managing Director in the office, or me, and talk to us about your decision letter. And we'll go through with you in case you have any questions about, I don't understand what information the council thinks is missing, or I don't understand why when we submitted this information about our finances that the council's not sure that we comply with standard 202, the finance provision. What do you think the council wants? And once again, although we can't guarantee what the council will ultimately decide, we try to help schools by saying, we think what the council was concerned about. We think this information, for example, would be helpful in it determining whether you are compliant with the admission standard, the finance standard, etc. We try to help you as much as possible, and we'll do that with each decision letter. And certainly, if you should find yourself facing a hearing, I go through, and Stephanie will also be willing to go through with you the process, what you should expect, who you might want to bring along at the hearing, and the kind of things that we think the council may ask you. So we try to be as helpful as we can with the, like I say, ultimate disclaimer. It's ultimately the council that will make the determination. So if you'll move to the next slide. So I just wanted to end by talking about how the process has changed through our virtual visit process. As I indicated, during the pandemic, we're doing virtual visits. Unfortunately, now the Department of Education, although it permits accreditors to do virtual visits, it requires an in-person follow-up. So during the pandemic, this is going to be complicated because, once again, I don't want to send people on site while it is unsafe to do so. So we're going to try with the site reports to resolve as many of the standards as possible and limit the follow-up required follow-up visit by the team to maybe 1 or 2 people. And the only things that appear to us to be complicated to try to do virtually are the facility visit and the class visits. And so the current thinking that we have is with that follow-up visit that is required by the Department of Education, we will have the one or two team members go and look at the facility and do some class visits. And if there are any follow-up issues, so for example, if looking at the initial report, the council decides that there are some things that it's concerned about, we might ask the team, so will you follow up on this question the council has about the admissions, et cetera? As I've already alluded to, we are doing a staff review of the SEQ. We're providing feedback and direction to the team. We're likely to continue that after the pandemic. And as I indicated, after the pandemic, we may do virtual visits or at least hybrid visits where part of the team is on site and part of the team is virtual. We'll continue to study that after we see how the spring visits go. And so that's all I have today. Thanks again to the AALS for inviting me to talk.
So thank you so much to all our speakers. I know you gave a lot of helpful information and we've got some questions, so I want to get to those quickly. As far as some people asked for the PowerPoint and whether the virtual classroom visit form was available, they are available on the chat. So we put the links up there for the handout, and also the PowerPoint is up there now. And I think Phil just answered about the fall 2021 that he hasn't fully decided, but it may be virtual. So that's what he knows about that. What do you recommend for meetings as faculty as a group? Since a large lunch might not make sense, and somebody did post that Zoom had worked well with the large group, but do you all have any opinions on how to deal with the faculty?
Well, I'll start. A large group meeting gives you some information, but it's usually pretty stilted and individuals aren't likely to talk very much. It helps if you break up into different tables and ask members of the committee to meet with major committee chairs. It's useful in that way. But alternatively, setting up those sessions one-on-one with key committee chairs. I think it's also a good practice to have a time when you let the entire faculty know where the team will be. This is assuming you're in person. It could be done virtually, and allowing faculty one-on-one to come in and talk about whatever they'd like to talk about in confidence with the team. Those can all help.
Our next question is, do you anticipate that a law school would aggregate information on its student body, faculty, staff on the metric of gender identity and gender expression? And if so, how do you anticipate that a school should go about getting that information?
No, we do not at this time, for just the reason built into the follow-up question. We're not quite sure how that census would be taken, so it is not something we are asking for.
But I can tell you, I've seen on a couple of the reports, if someone has self-identified, so for example, if there are three people who have self-identified their gender identity or gender expression, they don't want to say they're male or female, they choose a broader definition, that we see some of that in the school information. Same thing with the faculty. So there is the ability to self-identify, and some of that comes through from the schools.
Okay,
I'll also add that one of the priorities for the council this year is taking another look at our non-discrimination standards and seeing if we need to rethink them and about how we enforce them, and also about how to provide better guidance to the schools about what those standards mean. And we've had some roundtables where we've sought input about that, and we'll continue to look at that. I mean, one of the things that I want us to ultimately think about is We use the federal definitions of race and ethnicity, which a number of schools find unsatisfactory because there's limited categories, plus the federal government's categories have specific instructions about, for example, they instruct people to classify Middle Easterners as white. Also, they require that if someone identifies as Hispanic, they can't separately identify their race. So those are things that we're going to be looking at as to whether we want to expand our categories. One of our biggest concerns, one of the reasons we've not done that, is we're not sure whether that's going to create a lot of extra burdens on schools because their software or whatever only use the iPad categories, and is this going to create a lot of extra work that doesn't make it worth it, or maybe it's worth the extra work. And so that's one of the things I think we're going to try to explore with the schools. Would it be burdensome if we expanded the categories beyond the federal categories? And if so, would it still be worth it to do that? So that's one of the questions that I'm pondering.
The next question is somebody's mentioned that they had an experience in the past where they might have missed some information if they weren't directed to a former faculty member who wasn't part of the fact finding, really. And so they wanted to know what you all thought about talking to formal faculty when you go to the schools to get information. So sometimes maybe somebody on the faculty have said you really need to talk to John Smith, who's not on the faculty anymore. He's retired. What do you all think about that?
I think you should, from the ABA perspective, I think you should talk to your chair about that, and you and or the chair talk to the office. We tend to not think that is generally good. There are exceptions to that where there may be vital information that otherwise can't be obtained. But going to former employees runs the risk of not getting, accurate information or timely information. So it's a sort of thing like we do encourage people to call our office, and we'll go through why do you think this person needs to be contacted. Like I say, generally I have said I don't think it's a good idea. There have been exceptions, but they have been exceptions to the rule, at least from the ABA perspective. I don't know how the AALS feels about that.
We feel very much the same way. It's not a normal practice for all the reasons you've suggested, Bill. It's not to say there couldn't be a situation in which it might be important to fact gathering. But we need to remind people that the site visit is not about individual faculty complaints. It really is to get an overall feel for the school.
The next question was, are these virtual meetings with the faculty or the students and the staff, are they being recorded?
No. We're not asking the team members to record. And actually, I should mention that, in fact, we have some guidelines about how to do the virtual meetings. And so, for example, with the teams, we're having them use the ABA Zoom, and so that there's not a concern about who's listening to whatever. So we have some guidelines about that, but generally we're not requiring interviews to be recorded, and I would not encourage that. I don't know if the AALS feels the same way.
Yes.
Okay. And then, Bill, will final decisions be delayed until a residential visit could happen? So if you have to go by the rules to that follow-up in person, are the final decisions delayed until that can happen?
Because it's so up in the air as to when an in-person follow-up can happen, the current thinking in the council is we'll look at your report and try to make determinations on everything we can. I think on most of the standards, we can make a determination that you're in compliance with, 95% of them. Like I say, the only thing that may be up in the air is should the follow-up visit look at the facility and make the final determination on the facility, although maybe virtual visits of most facilities won't even resolve that. the class visits. So maybe we'll make a further determination on teaching. But I think with over 90% of the standards, we can look at the initial report and say, your website's fine, your links will work, your policies all work. We don't need to wait to say all of your academic policies and those sort of things are compliant.
Okay. Well, we have one more. Do you anticipate any changes to the AALS or ABA questionnaires for 21-22? And when will the materials for those be released if you do have changes?
So for the ABA, we generally approve the questionnaires in the spring and release them in the summertime. There are always clarifications and minor changes. As I indicated, the council is looking at some at the diversity standards and the distance education standards. I don't think those could be final probably before the 21-22 visits, but if those standards change, there could be. I think the one that's more likely to get a change might be the distance education standards, since everybody's doing distance education now. So we may modify those questions. I'm not anticipating big changes in the rest of it. I'll mention that we have a training in the summer on the questionnaires. I strongly encourage people to come to that. And in that summer training, we go over any changes we've made to those questionnaires. We also do a fall training for site teams and schools being visited where we talk about those things.
Judy, any changes?
And I will say for the ALS, we follow the ABA. So if the ABA makes any changes that we'll need to update our questionnaire on, or any other small changes that we want to update, we do it around the same time. So the end of the summer.
Okay. Well, our time is come. So I just want to thank all our panelists. You've been so helpful with so much good information. I hope our audience has had everything answered, but feel free to contact the ABA or the AALS because both organizations are happy to help you through this. Or if you want to volunteer to be on a site visit, please contact them. And I just want to thank all the people on the membership review committee of the AALS that serve with me. They're just fantastic. It takes a lot of work, so I appreciate all the hard work that they do and all the hard work that the ABA and the AALS staff does, because they do so much behind the scenes work, and it is, once you've seen it up close, you just can't believe how much there is to all this. So thank you all. I hope you have a great annual meeting, and I'm sure I'll see you at future panels. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.